Hi everybody, in today's video we're going to cover TileSet asset creation in Aseprite. Hi, my name is Michael and welcome to episode 2 in chapter 2 where we're talking about world building foundations for our Metroidvania in Godot. And in the last video we kind of took some inspiration from other games and developed a mood board and tried to develop and define some sort of art direction that we could move forward with. And you can see here I've already actually done work in regards to this, and some of this work was done during game jams, and then I've kind of brought some of that together and refined it a little bit. The file that you see here is available on my itch.io page, and so if you want to open it for reference or just use it in the subsequent tutorials for this chapter, then feel free to go and grab that. But I'm going to talk about in this video the concepts and approaches I use when creating these tile sets. And you can see that I've got kind of multiple things going on here, because in general there's two basic ways that we can approach creating tile sets for a pixel art game like this, and this applies to more HD 2D platformer games as well. Essentially, you can see I've got things like this grass platform here. These are kind of reusable sections that we can paint and draw with, but I've also got some auto tiling configurations over here as well with the dirt and this stacked stone. And I'm going to show you my approaches to both of these and talk about the pros and cons to each type. And I'll show you a little bit about how I go about creating and drawing these, the approaches and practices I use here in Aseprite. Now, if you don't have Aseprite, there are other softwares that you can use that are similar. No matter what you're using, these general concepts will apply pretty much across the board. So let me give you a demonstration here in Godot about the differences of the two. So if I'm drawing with regular tiles, I would come in here and make a selection of the pieces I want, and then I could just draw them freely as I feel that I need to. Okay, so if I'm drawing a corner, I could just select the corner pieces. Maybe I need to connect a piece of ground right here, draw it out, and so on. Okay, and so you just select the pieces that you need, and then you can come in and draw them. Okay, so that's how a standard tile set works, and this is fine. It's a little bit of work because you got to select what you need, but for simple levels, this is not that big a deal, and it does provide the ability for you to use multiple tiles to create larger patterns. Now, the benefit to these auto tiles, which we'll call terrains here in Godot, is that you don't need to, once you have it set up, you don't need to select a piece. Okay, this shows all of the pieces in that terrain, but you can see if I just have this drawing brush, I just draw and it automatically connects everything, okay? And because of the way we've set up that file, it just knows how to generate these different pieces of terrain. We can make tall, skinny things, we can make lines, we can make blocks, corners, it's all automatic. Now the downside is we don't have as much nuance because we can't really say what happens, 2 pixels deep. So if we make a big piece of rock, it's not going to be able to fade to black here unless we do that over the course of just one tile. Okay, so you're a little bit more limited in the range, but it's a lot simpler to draw these. And for some games, this is ideal. And for others, for visual reasons, this is ideal. It just kind of is a push and pull of, what your goals and what your hopes are for your different tile sets. Let's go ahead and begin first by just creating a new document or new Aseprite file that we can use to create stuff. And so here within Aseprite, I'm just going to go File, New. And when you create a new sprite, you're going to have to define the size. Now, for this game and for my project, I like to work with a 32 pixel by 32 pixel size. That's my grid. That's each tile. But of course, I'm not drawing just one tile. I'm going to be drawing a whole bunch. And as you could see in that example I was just showing, I'm drawing them in one giant document. And so really what we want to do is we want to make a document size that gives us space to do so. One thing we could do here is we could just multiply this by a number like times 16, and then that'll give us something like 512. These numbers, 32, 512, 1024, these are power of 2 numbers, and they're actually optimal when it comes to graphics programming, and so it's kind of recommended to use those. But I actually would like to make this even wider, so I'm just going to multiply this by 2 again. That gets us that 1024. That's the width of the tile set that I'm going to be making here, and I'm going to set the height to 512. You don't have to use these exact values, but this is going to give us a grid that when we turn on a grid of 32 by 32 pixels, you're going to see that it fills this out quite nicely. And right now I turned on the grid. You can see though it's 16 well, I mean, you can't tell that maybe, but this is 16 pixels by 16 pixels. So I'm going to go ahead and change this real quick. I'm going to come up to Edit, go down to Preferences. And then in here, I can just make some changes. Let's see, what do I want to find? I want to find my grids. So grid, you can see the width is 16 by 16. So I'm going to change this to 32 by 32 because that's my desired final size. Okay. So once I say okay, now you can see that that's the grid size I've got. And that grid size matches the grid size here. And as you can see in this example, this grid comes and it fits the document size perfectly because 1024, 32 is a multiple into 1024 and 512, right? It's a multiple of, I don't know how to say that right now. So that's a good start. We're going to just start with that. Now, let me just point out the two types of sprites that we could be creating for our game. And you can see some of them represented here. One way to approach the sprite sheet creation is just to draw sections and pieces of tiles that you can use. Okay, and that's what I've done here. You can see I've drawn some sides and like a corner and some flat bits. And these pieces of ground require a piece underneath it to help it fade into my dark black-like color. Okay, and so this is one method of doing something like this where you get a little bit more detail. I've made sure that these tile across with each other so that I could paint them interchangeably and it's still going to create a seamless tile, and we'll look at how we can do that as we start building it out. And then I've built, some other corner pieces and some decorative pieces like this that's just kind of flattened out and smashed and looks different, and this one's a little bit of a bump, as well as other things like corner and bottom pieces that I might need as I'm fleshing out a world or a level. And I've done the same thing here a little bit more simply with these brick patterns that are going to be used like in the dungeons and the castle areas of our map. This one's far more simpler. You can just see it's basically just a rectangle, but I've given it enough space that I can fade these colors to black over the course of a couple tiles so that it gives me a little bit more nuance to the tile designs that I'm creating. And then over here you can see I've got bits that represent corner pieces, okay? And then I've got other tiles here that do different things. But these general tiles, this is a standard way that a lot of people will approach creating tile sets when they're new and creating tiles. And actually, I like doing this style of tiles more than the other type. Now, the other way we can do tiles is to create something like these. Now, this is an Autotile tile set, and let me open a simpler version of this so I can kind of illustrate what is going on here. Okay, so this is the template that I follow when I'm creating that Autotile, and it probably looks a little bit confusing, but essentially what we're doing is we're creating one blob of tiles, and this blob of tiles is going to account for pretty much any possible configuration of tiles if you were to draw different shapes, right? So, for example, in the top left corner, this is what the tile would look like if you just drew one in isolation with no connecting tiles. This one next to it, you can see connects to a tile on the right. This tile connects to a tile on the left. This one connects to a tile above, this one to a tile below, and so on and so forth. You've got all these different variations. And now to some degree, this looks like there's way more tiles than you need in here, but actually these are all necessary to be able to create a really complex auto tile that handles pretty much every scenario. The only thing that's duplicated within this is there are two tiles that are just if there's a tile completely surrounded. And if I turn on my grid, you can see right here is a tile that's surrounded on all sides. And there's one right here as well. And so that tile is duplicated, but everything else is unique. And this pink piece of tile that I've drawn into this template is just an example of how these connect. And this kind of represents that bit masks that we'll create in Godot in future tutorials when we're setting up our Autotile tile sets. But it shows you the connection, right? Basically, a block in the center and there's no connecting tiles draws this one. If you have a block, but there's one to the right, then that's what it looks like here. You can see that this block will have a block to the left, to the right, to the bottom, and to the bottom right, okay? But nothing to the bottom left or any of the above tiles, okay? So you see that pattern going throughout? So this one being solid means that it's surrounded on all sides, including diagonals, by another block. And we can set up rules in Godot to be able to draw these automatically as we're just drawing with our pen. And so this is a really handy way to create automatic tiling tile sets within Godot. There are other methods and other blobs and other ways that you can do this. This one is less common, but I really like it. And it was referred to me by a buddy of mine when we were doing a game jam a couple years ago, and I've stuck with it ever since. So you can use this. This file is included in the chapter 2 package on my itch.io page, so you can grab this as well and just kind of draw on top of it and create your own. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this, and I'm going to bring it over into my sprite sheet just by pasting it. Now, to copy everything, if you need to, it's Control-Shift-C, or because I've got layers here, but if you're just grabbing the one from itch.io page, it's probably a single image. But anyways, I've brought it over here. It's now on layer 1, and I'm going to move it because I don't really want it right there, but I do want to keep it lined up with this grid so that when I come to drawing it later, it fits. We need everything to fit within these blue grid lines, which you can toggle on and off with the control apostrophe. Okay, you want to make sure everything lines up with that, because once we're done with this file and we bring it into Godot, we're going to have it automatically kind of adjust or cut and slice up this document and be able to draw by these grid tiles. So if something isn't aligned with this, it's not going to work very well with that process. Before we start drawing, I want to refer back to some of these reference images that I gathered as I was getting inspiration. And I want to start by just looking down here. You see, this map is one that lends itself relatively well to something that might be auto-tiled, because you just would be drawing and you want the corners to happen automatically. Now, Owlboy uses a lot of tile sets that aren't very auto-tile friendly. In fact, let's go up here and give a really good example of this. You can see that, the ground here for this floating piece of island, it would be hard to create an auto tile system that would draw that naturally. So chances are they maybe had some different pieces that just looked like this and they just draw them in there. Okay. But all of these different tile sets and examples are going to have various ways of implementing, and you can see most of them aren't really super auto tile friendly. Okay. So you might want to mix and a match. You can see in this example here, these look like they could be auto tile pieces of template, but maybe the ground less so, right? Because it's a little bit more unique. You've got a slope. Things like slopes are not easy to do with auto tiles. Chasm looks like maybe it's got some auto tiling going on. It's hard to say for sure, right? Okay, so if I were going to start creating tiles here, this is generally the approach I would take. I would start with, my dark, my black, or my dirt color. And if we go back and look, I've got some of those defined over in that document that we created for reference. So I'm going to open that up. And in here, I'm going to just start with these colors that I defined. And they're not the exact same ones that I actually used to create this tile set, but let's go ahead and use this as an example so you can see how this might be useful. And in fact, I'm just going to select these and I'm going to copy them. Most software can copy and paste between it. Okay, so I'm just going to paste this here. There we go. I've got my little color palette. I want to actually put this on a new layer. I'm going to utilize layers to keep things separate from each other so I can work on one without ruining the other. So new layer, I'm going to go ahead and cut these. Oh, I didn't quite cut them. Let me do this again. Oh, I got to select the correct layer. There we go. I'm going to just paste this on a layer that I'll call reference. And just go ahead and leave that there for now. And then I'm going to make one other layer. And we'll give this layer a name of just like TileSet. And then layer 1 can be our auto tile layer, okay? Because this is what has that auto tile on it. So let's just look at this tile set. Now, one thing that I'm going to do when I'm creating ground is I'm going to just start with the dark color and work towards the light. And the other thing that I'm trying to accomplish with this sprite sheet is that depth, right? And by the depth, I mean this. I want to be able to see the tops of my platforms just a little bit. Now, you don't have to do this. In fact, in some ways, it's a lot simpler if you don't, especially if you're creating those auto tile sprites. But for sake of argument, let's assume that you do want to do that with me. I'm going to go ahead and select this dark color. Make sure I've got the tile set layer selected. In fact, we can lock these other ones so that we don't actually paint on them. Okay. And I'm just going to, for sake of ease while I'm starting, I'm not going to draw up in the corner here because that's kind of hard to see. So I'm just going to start here, and you can see I've got a brush that's 17 pixels. I mean, the size isn't super important, but starting with a big brush is usually a great thing. 32 pixels is one block. And so I'm just going to draw a couple blocks of how that might look, okay? So if I were to try and duplicate that same kind of pattern, then I might need multiple blocks, okay? We'll have maybe small blocks that the player can jump on, little platforms in the air, but generally I'm going to be working with these larger platforms. Okay, so that's the dark. And then of course I'm going to have grass and rock that fades into these. We're going to put maybe rock on our sides and on our walls, and then we'll put grass on the top. And so we can just go ahead and select this grass, and I'm going to make the smaller brush. And I'm thinking the top is going to be not quite half of this, but most of the way. So I'm going to just maybe make a 12 pixels brush and just click over here and hold shift and click on the other end. Okay. And I kind of ran over. So let me just erase this a little bit. Okay, there we go. So now we've got a piece of ground and it's got a top. And yes, this looks dumb, but trust me, this is often how I start, and it will be just this simple. And then you just embellish the details once you have the basic form in place. Let's go ahead and turn our grid back on. I'm going to grab this rock color because this is what our sides will maybe use, right? We'll have some rocks that are kind of going to be coming in from the sides. And if you wanted, we could take this one step further. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and just finish this out. I should have actually used this color. Let me just fill that. There we go. And I'm going to fill this. Okay, so now we've got a piece that we can use to draw rectangular boxes of and just about any size that we need, right? But we want to add that embellished detail, okay? And so I'm going to take this color, for example. Let's just start with this corner piece, because this corner piece is going to be able to help us put some details in that define how the rest of the pieces should look. And so generally all I'm going to do, I'm going to take the eraser and maybe take off a corner. And, you know, this is really hard to see that color difference. So I'm going to go in real quick. I like to do this sometimes. I'll go into my preferences. And for background, we can change the color of this grid. And we can change the size of the grid. I'm fine with 16 by 16, but I'm just going to change the colors so that there's more contrast. So I'm going to make this kind of a blue-green color. I don't know, maybe a purpley color. I'm not quite sure yet. Let's click apply. Okay, you can see that a little bit better. And then I'm going to make this other color kind of match it to some degree. Okay. There we go. Totally different looking grid. And that, you may not like that. And in fact, that's pretty strong, but sometimes I'll do this for a while I'm working. So this edge, I don't want them to be perfectly straight. I want to add a little bit of character to it. So I'm just going in with the eraser and erasing some bits. Now, the important thing is that we make sure that however we do this, they match all the way across, right? So if we're 1 pixel in on the side, then we want all of these to meet 1 pixel in, and then they can do different patterns underneath that. Okay, so there we go. We've got a little bit of a rock shape, and rocks are pretty simple to draw. I just need to get the brush tool, not the eraser, and just draw in here. Now I've got Pixel Perfect on, which will make it, you see how it's like preventing me from making blocky shapes. If you turn Pixel Perfect off, then you can get like corners like this. That's just a tool to help you draw slightly different styles. So I'm gonna go ahead and erase that. I'm gonna keep Pixel Perfect off. I don't like it on a lot of times, especially when I'm blocking in stuff like this, because I just want to be able to just draw and just fill it in. So what I'm looking for is some sort of rocky pattern of just jaggy lines, and I'm gonna smooth some of them off, just like this. And that's a good start. I mean, you're probably thinking you're crazy. You're crazy, Mike. That's not a good start. That looks awful. And you're right, but that's okay because we'll make it look better. I'm going to draw a couple other things in here, like some cracks, maybe that run across these rocks, something like that. Okay. So we've got some different separating shapes kind of forming here. And maybe what we ought to do is make it separate right there. And in fact, I'm going to erase that. If you right click in Aseprite, it'll use whatever eraser setting you've got on. Okay. I'm just adding more variation to these shapes, right? And I'm bringing them out and then back in. And so that's now become my new standard for how it terminates, which if I've got a black line at the bottom of every tile, then I should have a solid line at the top of every tile. But you kind of see where I'm going with that, right? Okay, so now that we've got a general rock shape, we probably want some of these rocks to appear beneath this grass as well. And so we can just come in here and do something like that. And you don't have to worry too much. The one thing that's nice about pixel art is it's kind of impressionistic, right? You're just making these weird shapes that, I mean, you wouldn't say that's a rock. It could be a coin. It could be a ball. I mean, it could be just about anything, but it doesn't have to be perfect, you know, and that's kind of the beauty of it. Now, one thing that we're going to want to do at this point is I'm going to pick a different color just a slightly darker, more orange brown. Maybe that's too orange. Too dark. Somewhere in here. And I'm just going to draw some of these in-between colors to give it a sense of shading, okay? And this is pretty easy to replace later if you decide you don't like the color. But I think this fits pretty well with what we've got going on. And some of these dark lines I'm going to color in with this this lighter, or whatever, this in-between color, because I may not want it to be so dark everywhere, right? But essentially what I'm just doing is I'm picking sections of the bottom of each of these shapes and just filling them in with this color to give it the illusion of some sort of shading and depth, okay? Just got one more rock up here to touch up. And there we go. You could even come in here and make some shapes of rock, something with the darker color, okay? So that it kind of extends in. And then if you're really adventurous and you want to add one more layer of color, you could come in and get a lighter one, and you could come in and draw some highlights on these, okay? Now, if I look at my Forgotten Forest tile set that I've worked on, I've got a lot of color variations in here. And so I've done this process that I'm doing over and over and over and just kind of refined it. That takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that on your first tile set until you get it all kind of working, okay? So let's just kind of keep it simple for now and keep our color palette simple. But go ahead and make it look kind of pretty, I guess. Okay, something like that. So we've got our rocks defined. Now we kind of need to deal with the top. Now the top of this grass, what I'm going to do is, I think the top color is good being kind of a bright green like this, but I want it to get darker, obviously, as it turns. There needs to be an edge to this top, right? And let's look at a reference example to see how that's done in other games. Now, Owlboy does this where they kind of just transition to the rock, and that's most of the transition. This game, you've got a little bit of a darker green and lighter green, so there's like an edge to the grass. It's like the grass is hanging over the sides of the rocks a little bit, and I prefer that. So I'm going to go for something like this here. They kind of do this here with like darker leaves hanging off, okay? So let's mimic this to some degree. So what we can do is, we've got this green. Our darker green needs to get maybe a little bit bluer and obviously darker and maybe less saturated. So I'm going to just kind of try and make a color here. Something like this. Yeah. Okay. And in fact, if I were to draw a line straight across, that would indicate maybe where this shape turns and goes down. And then everything else is facing up. And then this darker green and these rocks are facing towards the camera, right? And so really all you need to do is just come in here and paint, you know, your grassy shapes that are overhanging, like they've got in some of those. And voila. And in order to help these stand out, it would be nice maybe to take this darker color and paint underneath them. And so I've kind of painted over some of my highlights, but that's okay. So now you can see the edge of that a little bit better. And voila, I'm going to just select this light color and I'm going to drop the opacity to 50%. And I'm just going to click somewhere over here. Right there. And now if I hold Alt and click that again, I've got a new color that's in between. And this is good because I might want some different variation, right, to the grass to give it kind of some layering. And in fact, on these, I'm just going to go ahead and add this line all the way across. There we go. And I'm going to be using this color to add other shapes of leaves or grass or whatever this is down here. Okay. So we've just got a little bit of variation. And then we can use this darker or in-between green to add some, you know, texture, lines and things to this other grass to kind of break it up. I don't like hard L type shapes like that, so I'm going to chop that there. You might need them if it's like wood or something, then that's fine. But for something like grass, it doesn't look organic. Okay. I feel like if this was wrapping down, then it might be brighter. I don't know. Okay, so you can see how far we've come just with some simple shapes. And that's kind of all there is to it. And then just rinse and repeat and do more and more and more of this, okay? But a couple of the things that we're going to want to do that can really add some depth to this that I like to do. I like on this leading edge where the front of this platform comes closest to the camera. I like to add a little bit extra highlight. So I'm going to just pick my green, drag it up here towards the white. That might be a little strong. So maybe I'll take that color and drop the opacity. That's even a little strong for what I'm wanting right now. Let's just drop the opacity even further. There we go. That's a good color. So now I've got yet one more color of green that I'm going to be throwing in here to give it a bit of a highlight. Okay. Just to help define the turn of that form as it goes into the distance is really what I'm aiming for with this. And then we can use this lighter color to other effect up here. Maybe you want some of these, you know how we've got these little grass blade looking lines. We can maybe add some of this light color stuff like this and just go throughout. And there we go. Okay, so we're starting to kind of fill out. You can see we've only got one corner of this texture defined. But now that we've done that, you kind of have a template and you can take that and repeat it across the rest of the tile and, you know, spread it across here. In fact, one thing that you can do if you're kind of being lazy, just turn on my grid again. I'm going to get the marquee tool. I'm going to select maybe this piece and I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste. And I'm just going to move it right over here and do that again for each tile like that. Okay. And then I know that these need to connect. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of making it so I know that this part matches on each of them. Now I can change anything in between so long as the left side ends up tiling with that. So let's go ahead and fill out this left side here. Let's give it some more rocks. And I know that this rock butts up against that. So I'm going to leave 1 pixel gap so that it's got a little bit of a gap between these rocks. Okay. And just take some of my highlight colors. That's an interesting highlight color. Is that really one that I've used? Yeah, I guess that's this regular color, isn't it? I just kind of covered up most of it. Okay, so I'm going to make some little bits of rock here and there. And then obviously my grass, I need to do some stuff with the grass here. Give it some, and maybe this piece goes up higher. I don't know, right? I feel a little bit like Bob Ross. Okay, just go ahead and paint in some different shapes. And then I guess this needs to adjust a little bit too. And just like that. And you may even want to come in here and like erase some of the pixels along the top of this to give it that kind of a grassy looking edge. Okay. And if you do this like I am after the fact, then you kind of have to go through and maybe do it to each of them. You could also come in and just erase all the way to the end. And then, I don't know, maybe just get a marquee tool, copy, paste. And then just I did Control B, which gives me a brush of it. And just paint it in there. And if you do that, you need to change your brush back to a regular shape when you're done. Okay, so I'm just filling this out and kind of making it so that it can tile. And if I turn off my grid lines, you can see right here it tiles pretty seamlessly. You can't tell that it's, you know, shifting from one tile grid to another so much. Here you kind of can because we haven't finished that. So what you could do, if you don't want it to be completely matching, like right now this right half of all of these kind of matches, what I would recommend doing is maybe just selecting a portion. So you can see now I'm only selecting the first quarter of that. I'm just going to do Control B and get a brush of that, and I'm going to click and just pop this in there. Okay. And now I've just got one tiny piece that I know is going to look pretty seamless with the others, but then I can do whatever I want on this remaining piece. So, you know, here it goes up, so maybe I want the grass to fall way far down on this tile, and you know, just do something totally different. Well, totally different. I mean, is it totally different? Not really, but you know what I mean. Yeah, like I don't want this piece of grass here. I'm just going to make this different so that it doesn't match the other one so much. I'm not quite sure what I want to do with this area. Something like that. Okay, so now this one looks different from the other one. And let's just go ahead and do one more variation over here. You know, maybe this has got some bigger rock pieces hanging around. Something like that. And there we go. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So now you could come in here and you've got a left corner and you've got multiple top pieces you can draw with. And really, just to be lazy right now, and this is actually a good way to start, I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to delete this one. And I'm going to take this guy here. Actually, hold on. I want to keep just a little bit of this. Boom. Okay, now I'm going to select this tile. I'm going to copy, paste, and I'm going to do, let's see, Shift H, just to flip it. Oops, except I didn't do that the right timing, so it kind of replaced it. So let me copy, paste. Here we go. Shift H, drag this over to the edge. Okay, there we go. Now I've got a piece of ground that goes all the way across. And basically we just now rinse and repeat for the sides. And these sides with these rocks are a lot easier than the top, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and just do that, and then I'll show you the result. Okay, so there we go. That's a quick implementation of how you might do something like this, okay? And then obviously, if you want that refined look, you just need to spend a little bit more time and add a little bit more color. You don't have to make the left and the right side match like I've done here, but that's just a quick way to get started. And then you can come in, add your embellishments to the different sides and make them a little bit unique from each other, right? So then they don't have to be the same. But that's how I would go about creating this kind of tile set. And then of course you do this for different shapes. What we didn't build with this were like inner corners and other things like that. And those are pretty easy to conceptualize. Essentially what we need to do is assume, well, what if this side connects to a top piece like this, right? And so we could just really quickly come in here and just take a copy of our side and then just pick a spot on our canvas. I'm going to turn off my reference colors so I can just do it down here. Okay, so if you've got a side, then let's go ahead and get a piece of top. Like this, and paste it right next to it. Well, we need that to look good, don't we? But it's pretty easy because from here, all you have to do is just pick some colors. Like let's say, basically all this needs to be the dark color. So I can just take a big brush and just fill that in, right? And then we just need the rocks and the grass to fill like it naturally follows that same pattern. So I'm just gonna fill that in a little bit, take this grass color and extend it over here a tiny bit like this, okay? And pretty quickly we've got an easy and convincing transition on a corner. And then you can just repeat this for the other corners that need it, you know, or you could even, because of how simple this one is, we could even just copy it, paste it, and flip it. In fact, there's even a way to flip tiles as you draw them in Aseprite, but there we go. We've got two corners. Do the same thing with these top corners, like this piece and this piece, right? And just make that, it's just going to be a tiny little corner piece like this that's mostly black. Okay, let's do that one real quick. Paste it over here. Give it a little bit of space for separation just so we can tell what we're doing. Boom. And same thing, get a big black brush, fill that in. Erase that little bit there. Okay, and I mean, that's almost done just with that simple, quick little fill that I did there, but let's go ahead and connect some of these appropriately, and voila. Okay, so that might be what your upper left corner looks like. You could flip it for the right, draw something just a little bit different, and that's how I go about creating these. And you just have to kind of go through and say, okay, well, what do I need? Now, this same kind of concept applies with this Autotile sprite, except it's a little bit different because we don't have as much space to work with. But because of how I've drawn this one and the transition to dark is only across one tile, we could pretty easily convert this to an Autotile sprite. And so I'm going to just work on that and we'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to do some of the same stuff and I'm just going to kind of work through and I'll stop and talk occasionally. Now you can see I've kind of already covered up some of those corners, but we'll go in there and implement those. Okay, so we've got one tile here. If we turn off our auto tile backdrop, okay, you can see how that's kind of fleshing out. And we just have to go around and make sure that we match all of these. So, you know, if we've got a corner that wraps like this, then we could start with maybe the left part of this guy here and just plop it in there. And we can really quickly go through. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste that, bring it over here, flip it horizontally, and just go through and get all these corners and all these edges and all these pieces. And you can see I'm just taking this edge and I'm just kind of plopping it in anywhere it seems to fit. Because I've already kind of drawn some of the shapes that I need here. I've got a corner. Let me go ahead and grab this corner. And I'm just hitting Control B to turn it into a brush. And then I could just come in here, boom, plop it in there. Technically, I should have done that over here, right? Just drop that corner piece in there. Just go around and find all the pieces that match. Pretty easy peasy. And again, you know, you don't want them all to be super samey, but this is a good way to start. And then you just go back through later and you make some little tweaks and changes to each section, okay? I've even got these pieces here that we've created that I can kind of take this, and there's going to be a spot for this over here somewhere. Let's see, where is it going to be? That's one spot where it kind of goes, but I don't need the whole thing yet. Let's see. Right there. That's kind of it, isn't it? Except I just need the top. So let me come in here and be a little bit more strategic in how I select this. Let me get this piece first. And anywhere there's a top left corner, I can just pop that in there. Boom, boom. You see how quick this is coming together? And I mean, this is something that comes with experience, I suppose, but it really is quite simple. And the more you do it, the quicker you get. So, you know, I could have just made a thing that did both of these pieces at once and then just gone through and done that, but it didn't take too much more time to do this. Okay. Let's get a top corner piece like this. Boom, boom. Okay, I'm gonna just paste this here, and then I'm gonna come over here and flip it, and then I'm gonna make a brush for the other side. And again, that shortcut for the brush, Control B. B as in boy. Okay, this is coming along quite nicely. This is by no means a perfect tile map, but we're almost to the point where we can use this, you know, in our project. I don't want to cover that up. It looks too good. Just get a piece of it. And where else do I need to finish? Over here. Any more grass? Oh, look, I missed a side. Technically, we've got a top piece here. Let's grab that. And let's see, that goes here. Douche. And then we can put some... I want this top right corner looking piece for right here. And then I'll grab this top left corner looking piece. Goes over here. This is looking kind of goofy right now, actually, but it's almost there. Okay, time to fill in this side. Looks like I didn't quite select the whole thing. There we go. Did I do that right? That looks better. Okay, we just need some bottom pieces. I'm gonna take this one here. We need some of that right over here. We don't need that much of it though. I'm gonna come back to that later. There, down here. And obviously this, I'm not doing a super careful job. I'm covering up a little bit of my previous work, so it's not perfect. At this point, I can probably take this black color and switch to the gradient tool and just fill some of this stuff in like that. Okay, so if I were to turn off the auto tile, you can see that we've almost got this working. Now, these look kind of weird the way they are, but trust me, even this is gonna work pretty good. Pretty good. So let me just finish some of this stuff off and give it a little bit of, you know, flesh it out a little bit. Okay. I didn't get one for over here. Okay. What do I got here? Top corner piece? Let's get some of that. Probably just this little bit right here. A little bit over here that needs filled in. And then, yeah, I didn't finish that part. Let's come over here and actually take this whole corner, because that looks better than what I've got. Pop that in there. Do the same thing here. Let me get this corner. Pop that in over here. Okay, and I've got some other spaces that we could maybe use that, but that's looking, this is looking pretty decent if I say so myself. I'm gonna take this, just that little piece right there. I'm not gonna make a brush. I'm gonna do, oops, I'm gonna do Control C to just copy that. I'm gonna come over here, paste it and flip it horizontally and just get it into place. Voila. Okay, so now if I wanted to, I've got an auto tiling sprite set up. It's not perfect, it can use some refinement, but I would much rather start with this and see how it works than, you know, spend 2 more days making it look perfect and realize that I got something mixed up, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and show you what this looks like real quick in Godot. All right, so here I am, I'm in Godot. I've gone ahead and I've just kind of brought this tile sheet in and I've set it up a little bit so you can see if we wanted to draw with these shapes that we created, we could, and you know, they work pretty good. It tiles pretty seamlessly, and we could use it to make any kind of terrain that we feel like we want to, right? And all's well and all's good. That seems to be working great. Boom. And I'm just going to go ahead and just fill that in there. Okay, so see, we can come in and do what we want with those. And I've also set up a terrain that uses our automatic tile sheet. And so if I draw with this, you can see, there it goes. It's just drawn away. Trying to draw a straight line there. I can draw filled in boxes. I did make some mistakes in our Aseprite file. And in fact, we can look at that real quick. So yeah, you can see right here, there should be rocks on the sides of these bits right here. But I noticed that as we're painting. So yeah, a little bit of issue and something else going on here with this side piece. But those are all things that we can just go back into the Aseprite file and correct. And then we've got, you know, once we export those back into Godot, then these tiles will reflect the changes we make to the tile sheet. So, you know, no harm, no foul with that. We just, hey, look, I got a visual issue I got to correct. Right. So yeah, we could just come in here and correct some of those issues if we wanted to. Let's see. Let me turn on my little grid here. I'm just going to delete this intersection of these, right? Because those are the ones that we need to fix here. Get this top left section and just copy and paste that over here. And then we'll do the same with the top right corner, which do we have one elsewhere? I don't know that we do. I feel like we should. This one, but it's got a little bit, well, that'll work. We can just use the right half of it. There we go. We fixed that issue. Now we can see that when I come back here, like I mentioned, we've updated those corner pieces and it's already updated here in Godot. It just had to reload the sprite, and pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I do want to look, I don't know if this is an issue with my sprite sheet or if it's an issue with my tiling setup. So I'm going to just inspect that real quick. I need to go over here to my terrain painting mode to kind of see how I've done this. And in fact, I'm going to change this color because it's kind of hard to see. There we go. Okay. So it's possible that I've set up one of these terrain bits wrong, and that's what's causing the issue. But, oh yeah, look at that. This should be one solid connection or section right there. Just like that. And then now if I come back, it's not going to automatically update this because it already drew the tile, so I didn't change what the tile looks like. I have changed the rule for placing the tile, so I can come back here to my tile map and just go over to terrains and pick terrain 0. There we go. Now if I draw that shape again, it fixes that issue. So that wasn't an issue with how I was drawing it, just an issue with how I was, at least not how I was drawing it in Aseprite. It was how I was setting it up here in Godot. Okay, so there we go. So I hope that explains kind of how those different tile sets work. Let's go back to our Aseprite file now, and let's talk about what the next steps are. All right, so we've kind of started and we've created some different tiles, and there's probably more that we'd want to add to this, right? Like if I look at my Forgotten Forest, I've got different thin tiles and ways for them to connect to this larger tile set. I've got these sloped pieces And of course, I've got different biomes or areas. I've got some dungeon tiles and other things here, including props. I've got tiles that are pushed into the background. I've got background tree sprites and even a gradient that we can use for the sky. Just a whole bunch of different things, right? A couple Autotile sprites. So what do we do? And probably one of the questions on your mind is, why have all of this in one place? And one answer is you don't need to have it all in one place. You know, I've partly done it for convenience sake so that I can provide you one file, but there is a reason to combine at least some of this tile work into one sprite sheet. Now you might want to separate the dungeon and the grass, right? And that would be fine. That would make sense to me. But you do want to put more than one thing on one image because it's going to be a performance saving measure. So you can imagine if each of these, you know, pieces of tile were loaded separately. We've got one for and in fact, usually I do keep my plants and torches and things on their own, but let's say you have everything on its own, then instead of one texture here, maybe we've got 30 textures. And even if the combined file size of those textures is the same as the one, it is 30 files that need to be loaded as opposed to one file that needs to be loaded. And so that fact alone adds a performance saving cost, not to mention that when you have, you know, 100 scenes in your game, you know, decorating your level, if they're all referencing this one texture, then that just saves in memory and it's a good performance saving measure. And so this kind of concept in 3D, if you're familiar with 3D work, it's going to be called having like a texture atlas where, you know, you've got multiple parts and components of a model textured and they're just saved into one file. And then you just render the quadrant of that texture that you need onto the particular mesh and so on and so forth. So that's kind of what we're doing here. And in order to make that work, we do need to kind of organize this a little bit. And so, you know, once you feel like you are good with your tile sheet, you've got all your tiles, you're going to want to move them to a spot that makes more sense. Now you have to be careful. Even though we could go through and we can update what a tile looks like, as soon as we move its location on this grid, it's not going to render the same when we open it in Godot again. Okay, so just, you know, warning, if you've been like me and you're testing this, like now that I'm moving these, they're not going to draw properly when I go back to my my test sprite sheet that I was drawing there in Godot. But it is good to move them, and you know, sometimes I like to leave one grid space between just so that it's easy to visually see what I'm working with. But there we go. We've generated one set of sprites, and the next step would be to fill out either more variation or add props or things like that. So let's do just a little bit of that before we wrap up the video. Okay, so one place where this, you know, depth style to the top of my platforms is going to bite me in the butt is in prop creation, because if you had built it so that this was one hard edge, then you could just build a prop that starts at the bottom of a grid and it would just sit right on top of the ground, right? But now if we do that and we're drawing with a tile sheet, you can imagine we don't want it to sit up here. We would want it to sit down here. Now, there are ways to work around that, and so I'm not going to let that stop me from just producing things, but these are ideas, problems, or challenges that one should keep in mind when you're working with your tile sheets. And you may not even want your props to be part of this file. You know, I'm going to leave that up to you. I think it's okay. I generally tend to have props as a separate file, and so maybe I'll have like all of my 32 pixel by 32 pixel props. Anything that fits in this grid, I'll make a file just for that. And in fact, we'll do that here, and we'll make one, and then you can choose if you want to continue to follow that pattern. I'll show you how we can bring it into this tile sheet and lay it out so that it's part of one sprite. And you know, there's different options there. So let's go ahead and just take that concept. I want to make some props that are small. So one thing you could do is come and make a new file, and we're going to make it 32 by 32 pixels. And this is going to be really ideal if you want to animate it, because one thing that this method of creating tiles does not lend itself too well is animation, right? Because you can't play back an animation if you were to make it across these frames. You just have to visually look at it. And so for animating, we're going to want to make a new sprite sheet, or a new Aseprite file. So here I'm assuming that maybe this is something like a piece of grass that we want to set on top of our ground, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and just get a brush, and I'm going to sample these colors real quick. I'm just going to draw a couple of them in here. Let me give a bigger chunk of brush. Man, that green is so close to that gray. Let's get the dark color, and let's get this lighter color as well. Okay, so I've got some colors of green there. I'm kind of missing this in between. Let's get that as well. So if I were to start creating this tile sheet here, and I should just put this on a new layer, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that, call it reference. This way I can turn it on and off. It doesn't have to be there. And then I'll just delete that. Okay, let's make sure my layer 1 should be clear. Lock my reference layer. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a simple like leaf or bush or something that we can animate, right? Something small. And you can make different versions of this. Maybe you've got some that are 64 by 64 pixels for large props, and then you can animate those as well. But let's just say that this is like a round leaf, kind of like what I've got over here. Okay, this is like a fun, weird, round leafy thing. And I don't know how big we really should make it, but I'm just kind of going with the flow right now. So I generally like to paint in 1 or 2 colors and just give some basic shape to it. And, you know, instead of changing this grid, another option for getting a different background is just to make a new layer and then pick a color, any other color that you want, fill it, and then we'll just put that layer in the back. Then we can just turn that layer off when we export it because we don't really need it, right? But it'll just be there as a background. So for this, it's kind of like a fern, I guess, what I'm looking at here, right? So maybe it's got, and I'm going to turn on Pixel Perfect for this. Maybe it's got some little curly Q bits sticking out. Oh man, that did not turn out very good, but that's okay. I can come in here and whoops, my eraser's huge. When you right click, remember for the eraser, it's going to take whatever property or settings your brush or your eraser had normally. Okay, there we go. That's a better bit of a Q, curly Q looking thing. So this would probably do something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure I like this. Just trying something different. I don't think this fits with maybe other things that I'm doing with my art direction, but it's okay. Okay, so we've got, I'm just going to flesh out this shape just a little bit more. I guess that's connected to that. And I imagine if this is a plant, it's might have a line up the center over here on the main plant shape. And then, you know, I don't know, it's probably needs to be a little bit more rounded. And rounding things with pixel art is kind of funny, right? Because you're using these hard edges. Just notice how I use different staggering patterns to get that round edge kind of look. So you kind of want to keep it smooth. So, you know, here we're going over 2, up 1, over 2, up 1, up, and then up and over 1. And then you gradually transition that to, you know, maybe you go up and over 2, and then maybe you do 3. And, you know, this is how you kind of create these gradual curve looking forms, is just by drawing different series of these lines, right? Connected blocks. But it looks pretty good when you zoom out or when you're just looking at the whole thing. So there we go. I've got a little plant. Now you got to be careful. I'm adding some details in here that are going to make it a little bit of a pain to animate. So you may or may not want to do certain details. But let's assume this is our plant. I probably just need to add more shadow and highlight to it. Okay, so I didn't really do any of this dark green anywhere else, so I guess we should add some of that. And maybe some of this even goes into these little bits. I think this guy down here would be all dark. Okay. And then some highlights. We just need some highlights in there. And generally I like to pick just a general direction for my artwork, and usually that will just be kind of from the top. You can go to the side just a little bit, but if you make it too harsh to one side or the other, then it isn't easy to flip and reuse that sprite. And one thing I like to do is I like to put highlights on edges, but I also like to put highlights so anywhere we have something where it's a change in the form, like here we've got these lines, they're like veins in leaf. I would probably put a highlight under it or maybe above it, and that's going to give like an embossed kind of feel to this. It's going to make it feel like there's a little ridge along those. You see that? Okay, so like it's raised and lowered. It's an emboss effect. I don't know if you play around with the emboss filter in Photoshop ever. Okay, there we go. So now we've got some leaves that have a little bit of shape to them. I'm going to put a little bit of highlights on these guys. Okay, there we go. There's a plant. And now if you want to animate this plant, it's really easy in Aseprite. We can just come down here to our panel, and there's a couple ways. You can make a new frame like this, and it's going to copy what's in the existing frame. If you want to start from scratch, you could say new empty frame. Okay, and then you can see I've got onion skinning turned on. so I can see what the previous frame looked like, and you'll be able to see what the next frame looks like as well. So for animating, that's pretty useful. And so here's what we'll do. Let's go ahead and make a new frame from this leaf. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to transform it. So I'm just going to go Control T. I want to skew this, and I'm not sure why. There it is. There it was. There we go. Skew it. Okay, I'm going to just skew it a little bit. I guess I could have come in here and typed it in, and then I need to maybe scoot it over. So now that's a little bit goofy looking, but if I look, okay, you can see my bottom shifted more than my top. I don't want my bottom to shift because it's fixed to the ground, so I should probably scoot this over. I'm just using the left and right arrow keys. There we go. Left and right arrow keys to change between frames. And in fact, let's go ahead and pull up our preview. So if you come down to view and preview, there's this preview window, and now we can play the animation, and that'll be playing as we work. If that's annoying, that sometimes is kind of annoying, especially in the early stages. You might not want to play in. But now we need to just clean this up a little bit. We've got some weird little things that happened as we skewed it, like this, you know, what happened to pixels missing, and there's an extra one over here. You know, so just go through, clean that stuff up. Maybe you think there's a cleaner way to do a line, etc. Okay, there we go. This is not wonderful, but I'm going to just keep it like that. So this is kind of a harsh looking animation, but what we can do, I'm going to do a couple things. First, I'm going to come here and I'm going to make a new frame in between them. So I selected frame 0 and made a new frame so it matches. Okay, now what'll happen if I turn off, let's turn off the background. So if I turn on this layer, you can see where my next frame is. It's clear over here. And even without drawing, I can just kind of use the marquee tool to select some little bits, and maybe I need to find the halfway point for this, right? For this leaf wobble animation. And, you know, maybe it's something like that. These little things didn't move a whole lot, but you can see it's already getting a little bit smoother. The bits down here are moving a lot. So let's go ahead and smooth this out by just kind of coming in here, manually painting maybe. I don't really like how this looks on this frame. I mean, I know it started kind of different, but let's go ahead and just make that line straight all the way down. Okay, so we're kind of just transforming our lines. Now this is harsh because it's going from 0 to 1 to 2 and then all the way back to 0. So I'm going to select these three by clicking and dragging, and then I'm going to make a new tag, and I'll just call it whatever, leaf. I don't care. Oops. And then let's open that tag back up. I wanted to set this animation direction to ping pong, which means it's going to play from 0, 1, 2, and then it'll play back to 2, 1, 0. And it's probably not going to work until we stop and start the animation again. Oops. Didn't mean to close it. There we go. Just by closing and reopening it, it did that. Otherwise, you could click stop and play. But now you can see it's a little bit smoother of an animation. I'm going to deal with this big main leaf first, and then we can deal with these little frond bits that are sticking off. So I think the animation here is okay. There's a bigger transition on the top than there is on the bottom, and it's a little bit harsh. And I think what I want to do is sometimes what you do is you just move 1 or 2 of the pixels along the path where it's going to go. And you can see how that gives it a little bit more of a, you know, we're transforming this shape as it goes, but we're maybe not making the full animation. I could maybe even remove that bit there. Yeah, that looks okay. And there's some other spots. You can see it looks like it's tearing right across the center, right about here. Yeah, there it is. It's this. And some of that is that this last frame should be adjusted, I think. Okay. And anything that stays next to things that move could potentially cause that weird tearing effect. So I'm going to go like this. And then we've got some other issues right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bump these over. Boom, just like that. Okay. And then now these little fronds, you may add more frames, but for now let's just make these fronds look like they're animating. Because they're only moving 1 pixel from the first to the last frame, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a smear. So we're going to we'll move some of the pixels, but not all of them. Okay, so we might pick a few strategic spots. And you can see how it's kind of smearing right there. And sometimes you'll move a complete pixel like this one. I didn't smear it so much, I just moved it. Okay, so we're going to do a combination of some complete movements and some smearing, just so that we get a little bit more of a smooth transition from one frame to the next. Okay. Now over here, we've obviously got some of these dark bits popping out. It was a little bit trickier on this one, I think, but not too bad. Okay, now it's looking a little bit smoother here. This little bottom one didn't even animate, but you could just take this. I mean, you could export this as is and just use it, and maybe you slow down the speed. Okay, you've got a leaf that waves in the wind. Or if you want to, you could come in here now, and you can see what I did is I went from a start frame to an end frame, and then I animated the middle frame. And what that does is it allows us to create, you know, like, okay, this is where I want it to start, and this is in animation, this is the concept of a keyframe. Like, this right here is the start, and then the end of the wave is this one right here. And then what we do is we go draw the in-between frames, okay? And this is where some of that language comes from, like keyframes, tweening, that comes from this concept. Tweening is just making the in-betweens, okay? So what we can do is if we want to make this smoother and higher frame rate, then we could just come duplicate layer or frame 0 again. And most of you, it's going to start at frame 1. I just have a setting turned on where my first frame is 0 because that's easier to relate over into Godot because they start with 0. So what I'm going to do here is now I've got a duplicate frame, but I can just do that same concept, but on a smaller scale. So we've got our handy reference. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to just select this. And in fact, a full pixel over is a little bit strong for some of that, but I'm going to maybe grab this right here and drag it over. And then I'm going to do that same thing that we kind of did with the leaves. I'm going to smear some of these just a little bit. Okay, so you can see that now these, even just by doing that top bit, right? A little bit of a transition over, but then it makes the second half kind of jerky. That's okay. We can just create a new frame after frame 2 and do the same thing. So I'm going to grab this top bit. I'm going to scoot it over. And there we go. Now we've got a nice smooth animation. If we speed this one back up to 1x speed, you know, it's still got a little bit of tearing. So a little bit of work we could do in here to clean it up. But in general, I'm pretty happy with that. And I think I could live with it. But that's how you go about animating these. Okay, so there's two options here. You could save this sprite sheet, or you could copy each frame, right? I could come over here and I could say, let's get frame 0 and let's copy that. And then I could come over to this file and then I could paste it somewhere. Boink, you know, then I can come back, go to frame 2, make sure you select the whole thing, Shift Control C to copy all the visible layers, and then just drag them into place. Okay, this is tedious work and it's hard to see the animation when they're laid out this way. But if you're just trying to conserve texture space and want to do that, I've done that here mostly to make it easy to provide one file for you guys to use. Okay, I otherwise would probably keep those plants in a separate file with a whole bunch of other plants. So, you know, I might have a file that's like this big, just with different versions of animated leaves. But that's how you could move that stuff over, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and just assume that I want these here for now, and we'll just drag them up over here, like that. I don't think I drug those properly. When you're working with things that need to fit to a grid and they don't go all the way to the grid, then make sure your marquee matches that grid, because then you can drag it and go, okay, oops, I need to bump it up 1 pixel. Okay, there we go. So there we have it. Now, the last step that we're missing from here to getting it into Godot, aside from doing more work, right, and making more props, is we just need to export them. So if we were to export this file here, you can go to File, Export, Export Sprite Sheet, or Control E. For this kind of a sprite sheet, most of these settings don't really matter because we're just exporting it as one file. We can see the whole thing. So we could come here. You have to make sure output file is checked and toggled on. Sometimes that's off for me and I don't know why. I'll have to look into that sometime. But obviously it won't save a file if you won't do that, and export will be grayed out. But so I could just export this as a test.png, And then if I go over to the folder where it exported, you can see I've got this file here. I'm going to open that real quick. And there we go. There's our sprite sheet. And of course, it's got a transparent background, so we are just seeing this black preview behind it. But now this file is ready to bring into Godot. Now, alternatively, if you're exporting something like this, where you've got the frames, this is where those export options come into play. So you have a few different ways to do this. You've got sprite sheet by rows, you've got by columns, and you can see over in my preview what it's doing with that, right? And it's actually previewing it right here as well. So you could do horizontal and vertical strip, which is kind of the same as by rows and by columns, except that this is just one row or column, okay? Or you can do packed, which is just going to try and optimize it into some kind of a square. I prefer to do by rows because that's how I think, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you do have the ability to put a limit on here. So, if you know that you want to maintain a certain size for your texture or have a maximum width or something, then you can come in and put a constraint on. And I'll usually say fixed number of columns. If you do fixed width, you have to be careful, because if you do a width that's larger or that doesn't fit, it's not a multiple of your single frame width, then it's going to cause problems importing that animation into Godot, or at least you're going to have to create a sprite atlas, and then you may as well just make it part of a bigger sprite atlas like we are with the, with my example here. Otherwise, what you do is you do fixed number of columns, because then if you just say, let's say we want 2 columns, then it's just going to say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? And you just pick a layout that works for you and then export it, and then you're good to go. And I didn't save that anywhere, so I didn't even check where it was going because I didn't have this file saved anywhere. It's in my Steam Apps common folder, whatever. Don't really want anything there, but that's where it put it. Okay, but that's how you can export those. And once you've done that, they're ready to bring into Godot. Just drop them into a folder and go ahead and use them. All right, so there we go. That's how I work on a sprite sheet like this. It just takes time and iteration and a little bit of inspiration. So draw from the art that you've gathered in your inspiration, in your artboard, your mood board, and start working on your own. Let me just point out a couple types of things that you should be working on, because this is your homework assignment now. You need to work on your own sprite sheet. Of course, you can use mine. You could even paint over top of this one if you grab it from itch.io. But a couple things. I've got one-way platforms, and I'll go ahead and turn on my grid. I've got props like rocks, bushes, trees. I've even got these animated torches, okay? And something that we're not going to use a whole lot right now, but you're going to want to think about for the future, I've got some destructible ground that we're going to be able to smash through. And I've got pieces of walls that you're going to be able to attack and destroy. I've even built this little grate that I'm thinking we'll use so that you can dash through it. I've already shown this, but this is kind of just an extra level of one-way ground that matches the general style of our grass, but has this kind of faded, misty blue effect so that it will be separated from the foreground a little bit. I've got these trees that are white because we're going to use a modulate to just color them, and white is an easy color to do that with in Godot. I've got my 2 Autotile things here. We've got the stacked stone platforms and walls, as well as the grass. I've got these sections that are going to be used primarily for background, for decorations. And then I've got some dungeon tile sets, as well as this bit of background that we can use in our dungeons, right? So we've got 2 tiles of regular stone, and then we've got this pillar shape, and this middle piece is repeatable, so we can make it as tall as we need to. So just a lot of different elements that we can use to kind of create interesting level designs. And obviously there's a whole lot more that you could do here. And this is just a selection from what I've built from a larger tile set that I'm working on. So go ahead and build what you think you'll need. Use this as a reference if you want to, or use it in your tile sets as you follow along with the rest of this chapter. Thank you for following along today. Go ahead and drop a comment if you've got questions, or if there's more specific types of sprite work that you want to see. Subscribe to the channel if you're new so you can see what's coming. And as always, we'll see you next time. I'm just coming in here, adding an extra layer of color to give it that extra bit of depth, you know. And this is where I like to noodle around, and other people will stop and it's fine. It's just all up to you how you want to do it, how much detail and how much time, and maybe kind of the general style you're going for. Yeah, you can see the difference between this and that one. This is the exact process I went through in creating the tile set that you guys can download. So have fun. See you next time.